Mike, appreciate you making time for me today.
No problem.
We've come to that time of the year and that time when we want to look at evaluations and observations and those sorts of things, see if we can find some ways to get better at doing what we're doing. I guess my first question to you would be, how do you think your year is going so far?
Obviously, there's going to be challenges to any school year. It usually starts well, and then you hit that challenging period. We were just talking about that earlier about student behaviors, with some of the students, especially the students that have come here from, outside the district or new to the district. The honeymoon's over, and they're starting to test their boundaries.
Sure.
So you've got to be prepared as a teacher to face those challenges. I try to be proactive. And when I then address certain students, especially certain students that I think the behaviors are digressing rapidly, I have a plan before I take those things on. But otherwise, I think like every year, I'm very excited about what students are learning in my classroom. And I think that that's really what the true measure is. And you know that this is a profession of delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really measure on a day-to-day basis. It's the cumulative effect that you're having on kids, because I also try to be a positive role model for students, not just what I'm teaching, but how I teach, how I treat them, that I'm here every day giving them my best effort. And if they know they're getting their best effort from me, because unfortunately I think that the students too often share the times that they're not getting their best effort from instructors, and that the instructors aren't fully committed to what they're doing. I'm fully committed to what I'm doing, and so I always know, and I'm a very reflective person, I always know that I'm doing what I think is best, and that I can only hope that the students kind of come along. And then the challenge is, as we'll talk about, I think, with what you would look for in an observation is, can I keep them engaged the majority of the time? The majority of the students engaged the majority of the time, and are they accomplishing the things that I want them to accomplish? And that primary goal of higher order thinking,
Sure.
Doing the critical thinking.
Sure. So now I know we're into second quarter, and we've gotten through the honeymoon phase with kind of all the kids, and we're to that stage where we're really on the downhill slide to Christmas. So we're trying to make sure that content-wise we're doing what we're doing. I know from being in your class before that you do a really good job with some of the cooperative learning structures, because I see those things. As we look forward to an observation, are there specific things that you want me to look for when I watch you teach?
Yeah, I think with our cooperative learning model, I want to make sure that students are kind of holding up their end of the bargain, because I don't think that that's true in all groups. I think that there are some groups that some students are having to pick up the slack where other students are starting to tail off. And I know that some kids struggle with that, but I'll just give you an example of something at the University of Kansas, for example, where my wife teaches. She teaches a class, and it's a capstone class for speech pathology. She has a group project in that class. She might even have two. I know she has one.
Yeah.
It's required by the university that she has a group project. Students come to her and complain about other students in the group not holding up their end of the bargain when they're turning in a group paper.
Yeah.
And she says, and she's been told this very clearly, well, it's your grade. What are you going to do about it when they don't hold up their end of the bargain? Are you going to just fix it? Or are you going to go to that person and talk to that person about them not holding up their end of the bargain? Because isn't that life? Life is, we're not getting what we need from you. Are you going to help us out, or are we going to have to almost like cut you out and just make up for the fact that now you're not giving us
Enough effort.
the additional
Sure.
piece that you're supposed to be, whatever your role is, scribe, researcher, the speakers are good. I've really had no problem with speakers. And I think that the nice thing about the speaker role is not only are they doing it for their group, they're doing it out loud for the whole class. So if I even just have one kid in here that can do that higher order thinking, all the rest of the kids benefit from it. Because as we've had the discussion, and at least they've scratched the surface of the topic, then when they hear the share out, right, and then I can also chime in, they're just like, oh, okay, something we didn't think about, but wow, really insightful, really powerful, whatever. And I think that's the value of the discussion, is that you get some benefit from doing it whole group, and then of course more benefit from doing it whole class.
Sure. And then that cooperative learning structure is pretty obvious. The small group, big group, sharing out. Yeah, I see that. So it sounds like what we really need to look for is engagement.
Yep.
It seems like we may want to look at in the session that I'll be in here, looking at engagement of all the kids.
Yep.
And I'll take a look at some different ways that we might want to do that, but looking at them over a number of times, every kid a number of times over the course of the time that I'm going to be in here to look for specific engagement.
Yep.
Does that sound like something that would be helpful?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then the ones that aren't engaged, maybe discussing, is that common for that kid, or did they just have a bad day?
Okay.
How do we address that kid if it's becoming a consistent problem?
Okay. So maybe some anecdotal stuff specific to the kids that aren't engaged.
Right.
And then we can look at patterns across the entire group, patterns across individual kids over time, and
Yeah.
those sorts of things.
I think it's the
Okay.
hardest thing as a teacher to do, is to have especially in a large class, is to have your mind focused on what I'm supposed to be teaching and what every single kid in the class is doing at any
Yeah.
given moment. That's impossible.
Sure.
So it's nice to get some feedback from an extra set of eyes.
Yeah, okay. So I will plan on having that in place when I come to watch you teach, and then we'll get together afterwards and kind of talk about what we've seen and see if we can't come up with some sort of goal for how we could address getting more of the kids engaged, see if we can troubleshoot that and kind of problem solve it a little bit and come up with a team effort. Make sense?
That'd be great.
Cool, thanks. So Mike, great lesson today. It was cool watching the kids doing what they were doing, getting ready for the paper that they're going to be working on, and working on their thesis statement a little bit today. I guess first question, were you pleased with the way the lesson went today?
Well, the one thing that I was happy with is I know kids left today knowing what the expectations of the assignment were and what a good thesis statement looks like. Or at least what a high enough quality thesis statement looks like for this topic, that there's no excuse for them to not be able to reproduce something of that quality. And you walk that fine line between how much structure you give them versus how much freedom you give them.
Mhm.
So the structure piece was, and we started with a lesson, or an actual document on the board about what a historical thesis statement looks like, so they can point out, as we see, change over time, analysis. You've got to have the who, what, and why in there. It's going to be more than a sentence. They know and understand that it's not just a real simple, basic one-sentence statement. It involves, quite a bit. And since it was a change over time paper, then they know that they have to have a starting point, and kind of an end line, if you're thinking of it kind of almost like a race.
Mhm.
So I felt good that they all know what the expectations of the assignment are. There was a pretty wide range of how effectively they use their time.
Yeah.
No question about that. And
Okay.
what are you going to do for the students that are not using their time effectively?
Mhm.
Well, it starts with holding them accountable for they're going to lose points if they don't have this done. Now they can go home. They might go home and just knock it out of the park when they're doing it for homework. Come back with it completed. But the probability of a kid not getting a lot of work done in class and then going home and being able to do this assignment effectively are probably not real high. So sometimes you kind of have to learn that lesson the hard way as a student, that I did not use my time effectively, and there are consequences for me not using my time effectively.
Do you feel like there were, if you kind of in the grand evaluation of everybody that was in the room, do you feel like most of the kids were there where you wanted them to be in terms of at least understanding and seeing the modeling
I
component?
think that the majority of the students that were here today, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I know that when we talked before, we talked about engagement specifically, and I collected the information every 5 minutes looking through on that. And I know that the engagement that we saw over the course of the 35 minutes that I had data for, and going every 5 minutes, engagement was running somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on the timing of
Right.
when things came through. Do you think that that is an accurate reflection of the general engagement from your perspective?
I would say so. And I think anytime that you turn the learning over and the responsibility and the ownership or control of how much I'm going to do and how hard I'm going to work at it, when you turn that over to students, you have to be, as a teacher, you have to be willing to accept some off-task, disengaged behaviors.
Sure.
How much can one teacher, as they go around, giving individual feedback? How much can they expect the students that they're not directly overseeing be engaged? That's where you try to build, through my cooperative learning structures, right? You try to build a relationship that there's at least one strong leader in the group. And if that one strong leader is able to answer questions and help their other group mates and has a good working model that the rest of them can kind of use, you hope that at least over the course of the 84-minute block that everybody had an opportunity to benefit from the time that they were given. So
Now, you mentioned just down the reflection part here, you mentioned the modeling on the board, and I certainly saw that with 2 separate examples and then the kids coming up. You also mentioned in your reflection talking about getting around to talk to the different kids and getting that one-on-one with each member, with the members of the different groups. Could you talk a little bit more about how you felt the individual sort of feedback with each individual group?
I think that the one-on-one is absolutely critical for writing,
Okay.
for ending up with, especially the students that really want to put quality work on paper. They have to have that feedback. And I think we all know that, feedback is like one of the highest levels of student performance. Students will perform when given the opportunity to get timely and specific feedback. How much more timely and specific can you get than working one-on-one and telling them exactly what's good and what's not good? Now, here's the other thing, right? So what's going to happen for the students that don't have timely and appropriate feedback? They chose to hide in the shadows, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the trick. Now, how do I get, and I have 150 students, granted that's not all world history classes, but
Sure.
When you have 150 students, I can't structure my day so that I'm trying to give 150 students one-on-one feedback every day.
Mm-hmm.
Not gonna happen. I have to pick and choose what skills, okay? What skills I think are important enough to provide that one-on-one feedback. And I think writing, which is not done enough at the high school level and not done to the extent that we're trying to do with this paper by writing a good quality thesis on a pretty high level topic with 5 paragraphs, a 5-paragraph theme.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be hard pressed to say that you, outside of English class, that you would find that in any other classroom. And so why not? Is that because most teachers aren't comfortable with perhaps the level of disengagement that could occur during that kind of one-on-one feedback sessions? It's possible. It's also possible they don't want to grade it. Maybe more likely that they don't want to grade 150 essays, unless you're an English teacher and that's kind of what you signed up for, right? So, there's a number of reasons that we could get into as to, why that's not happening. But I've kind of taken it on as a responsibility of mine to at least do one per semester, one major essay, research essay, each semester analysis essay that involves research, to where I think that at least when they leave my classroom, they've had the opportunity to do that.
Now, I know from seeing the lessons that led up to this, the scaffolding that went into this and the different primary document stuff that we did to set the kids up for this lesson, and I saw all that. When you're considering your lesson plans and how you're going to attack these different things, how much scaffolding do you feel you need to build in to your planning to get to something as high-end, high-order thinking as like this big essay?
I think that's, in my opinion at least, I think that that's one of my primary considerations. And I think it's a strength that I have as a teacher is how to build on an idea or build on a concept. Again, I think that my essential questions lend themselves well to doing that, because I can ask a question that they can answer with a very surface level response versus now a deep, well thought out, elaborate response. And that's kind of what I go for, is like, give me first gut instincts on what you think changed during this time period. And then let's actually take a deeper look at some actual quotes, and always considering along the way their perspectives, because they have a perspective, all those students have a perspective on human nature. Which one of these guys do you most agree with? Do you agree with we're completely evil, somewhere in the middle, or totally good, and that it's society that corrupts us, right? What a great, in my opinion at least, what a great topic of conversation if you're 15, 16 years old about, because you're thinking that of your fellow classmates, right? Which ones I think are evil, right, you know, and which ones I think are good, because I've got perspectives on what I think makes someone evil, how they treat me, what they say, you know, those kinds of things. So it's a really, in my opinion, it's a really relevant topic, and we could spend a ton of time just talking about it, but in the end, we have to do something academically with it.
Sure.
And then that's where they kind of are like, whoop, you know, now academic rigor, I'm not so sure I want that. I just wanted to talk about whether people were evil or not.
I know that when I looked at the engagement and was kind of going through and looking at how tied in the kids were, sometimes the kids were off, and I would say at different times it tended to be a different group of kids each time.
Yeah.
I kind of moved around the room and didn't seem to follow much of a pattern for most of the kids. There were a couple of that, as you said, that you would hold to that level of, well, you got to be responsible for your choices that you made in class. Another group that I think of that might be in that same boat as somebody that wasn't here today, or somebody that had extenuating circumstances that got them thinking about something else, like a state soccer
Right.
Semifinal later this afternoon.
Right.
In those cases, are there other ways that you can think of that you would try to engage those kids in a different way, in a different pathway, in a different sort of way of reaching them, rather than just what happens here in the classroom?
Right. Well, I still think that they're gonna be responsible for writing an essay. I mean, they still have to, at some point, produce that assignment, because that, it's like a test grade for this, you know, or quiz grade, or whatever, you know, how you're gonna think an assessment. But it's possible that for those students, I might take a rough draft of another student's work, or a sample essay on a similar topic that I could find, if I could find one online or whatever, then maybe not a 5-paragraph theme, but maybe something written, and at least get them to critique what they, you know, based on what we've learned, okay, what they think that this essay did well, and what, you know, what they would change if they were writing on the same topic or on the same premise. That might be effective, because missing a whole day in class where we've put practice thesis statements on the board, walked through what exactly I would say, who the philosopher is, and what the quote would be, and all that kind of stuff for my body. Having missed out on all that, other than working with me one-on-one for 30 minutes in seminar, you know, to do something like that, they're probably going to need to see a model. They're probably going to need to see an example of it, so that they can try to mirror that. And then once you've taken that back away from them, so that they can't just copy it,
Yeah.
and now you've seen it, I'm pulling it away from you, now go out and try to write something like this. And they hopefully that enough of it stuck that then when they're recreating it in their own words, then they've got a pretty good idea what it looks like.
And again, so what you were saying about not being able to duplicate the instruction that's going on in the classroom, I mean, I certainly understand that from my experience too, that when they're not there, it's hard to duplicate some things.
Yeah.
It's just, you can look for all sorts of other things to replace it, but it's
There's no substitute for being in class.
Yeah.
And being, you know, engaged, at least to a certain extent, right, in the thinking that was supposed to go on that day. Heck, I know that KU, my wife teaches a class at KU, and there is a 100-point assignment that is just 10 measures of attendance. That's it. If you're here, you got 10 points.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that just kind of reflects that even at the college level, the expectation is that if you're here, you're learning, as long as you're doing your job. Your job as a student.
The value
your
is
job
there.
Your job is to learn. If you choose not to learn, well, there's gonna be consequences that when you do the assignments about what you're supposed to be learned in class, you know, so.
So as I looked at kind of the way things went down, and again, you talked about the higher order thinking skills, and we're getting up there to the high end on the Bloom's taxonomy, getting to the end that we want the kids to really process what they do and take the next step with that information. And it's pretty clear that a lot of the kids are headed down that road right now. As you think about not only this class and in the rest of the year, would you see engagement and increasing student engagement as being something that you would put down as a goal that would cross across all your different classes? Is that something that you would worry more about with the younger, the sophomore age kids? Or is it kind of a generic sort of?
I think it varies depending on the lesson. I think what your expectation, and for each lesson, what does engagement look like?
Yeah.
Does engagement look like contemplative thought? If a student is sitting there and just kind of like staring off into space, are they engaged or not? Because the biggest question is when the teacher's lecturing and everybody is in their seat staring straight at the teacher, is that engaged? I would venture to say you're going to get lower engagement during a lecture even with students quietly staring at the teacher, okay, than you will with what would seem like chaos while they're supposed to be writing an essay.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to get more, I know, how do you measure that? You can't, unless you have a synapse or whatever you call it, a little reader on their mind that is saying they are processing what is being told versus they are thinking about what they did last night or what they're going to do tonight or what they're going to have for lunch. Because I have asked students questions when I've been lecturing before. I kind of look at a student, you can kind of see the glazed look versus the focused look, and you ask them the question, and they're like, I have no idea what you just said. And I'm thankful that they're honest, because what it shows you is that just because I'm standing up here lecturing and everybody's quietly staring at me does not mean that they're engaged. And so we have to work really hard, I think, as educators to decide what exactly do we mean by engagement. And there are some lessons and or activities that you can get full engagement. And as I mentioned, I think we were just chatting a minute ago about we could have done a round robin, an all-right round robin on thesis statements, and we could have passed it, right? And then, but then whose thesis statement do I have when I'm finished? I have my group's thesis statement. Did I want a group thesis statement for this assignment? Or were they going to take the group thesis statement and have to rewrite it? But how hard is it going to be now to write a thesis statement when you got the one right there? It's like, well, this looks pretty good, right? But it's not your work, and I need to grade them on their work.
Yes.
So I could have gotten much higher engagement in just a thesis statement activity, right? But they're sophomores in high school. They've probably done something, I would assume, in English class along the way, where they're going to have done practice thesis statements, just write, again and again, thesis statements. Whereas I wanted a thesis statement specifically about this topic. And I needed to see them write a thesis statement. I needed to put some on the board, go around one-on-one, look at them, give them feedback. Yeah, you're on the right track, change this, no, you forgot this. Which again, you're gonna get some then students that are disengaged during that process. But by the end of the 84-minute block, 80% of the kids walked out of here having received either one-on-one feedback from me or one-on-one feedback from a group member who is understanding what a good thesis statement looks like and had already received feedback from me.
That makes sense. So it sounds to me, like based on what you're saying, that after the process is done and they've got the paper written, that you want to then go back and maybe compare the engagement information that we kind of collected today and maybe compare that to the end product to see how those correlate.
Right.
And then go from there.
And there's no doubt in my mind that the students that I gave one-on-one quality feedback to are going to have high-quality papers because they already had exactly what they needed written down, and it was just now a matter of putting the finishing touches on it. They had the outline totally laid out, accurately aligned, philosopher's thought with quote they were going to use, with big idea that was going to guide the paragraph. I mean, they had everything all set up. But
So our guys that came in, that when we get to the evaluation stage and we're looking at their product and maybe their product wasn't quite as good, and we correlate that back to maybe a little lower engagement when they should have been engaged in class, what would be the next step for those guys?
Well, I think the next step for those guys is, first you have to try to convince them of the value of the time that they have in class. And if they still are not willing to do that, you can then start putting together those required seminar visits.
Yeah.
And that if you're, if you're gonna not use the time now, then you're gonna have to come see me in seminar, where we can walk through this a little bit more carefully, which is, one of the great advantages of having a block schedule with seminar every day is. And it might not be a lot of the kids, but for the handful that really, really need it, then we could do that.
So time frame wise, in terms of having the finished product, the kids are gonna have the finished product in your hands how soon?
Next class. So
Next class period.
they've got a weekend and then another. So today was white day, so green day. So they've got 3 days at home to work on this.
Okay.
Obviously, no one's going to work on it on Friday night, but
Well, we hope not, right?
but maybe on a Saturday, Sunday, and then a Monday night for sure.
And then a little bit of time for you to evaluate those things, and then maybe do that backwards correlation to the information that we got earlier. And then, based on the stuff that we've talked about today, the next thing for us to come back to would be to look at that backwards correlation from their scores on their product, and then looking at ways to get to those kids, whether it's as you said, finding ways for them to value the time more in class, going with a more structured approach in seminar, bringing them in to see you to demonstrate that engagement process
Right.
outside of class if it doesn't demonstrate in class. Okay, so it seems to me that if we collect this information and do that backwards connection to the data that we collected today, that within, say, 2 weeks, I should be able to get back with you and we can kind of go through that information and talk about processes that you would have in place to help those kids get to where we want them to be in
Right.
terms of using their time and being more engaged.
Right.
Okay.
Assuming that we get, of course, even them to turn an assignment in.
Yes.
The ones that don't turn an assignment in, then the consequences is 0.
Yeah.
And you've got to just convince them the next time you have to do your work, or you have to repeat the class. You know, enough of these kinds of major projects or assignments that you didn't turn in, bombing a test here and there too, enough missed classes, zeros on daily, and it happens, right?
Yeah.
And then they're repeating the class because they failed the semester. So you hope that that's not the case, but.
Well, the stuff that we talked about, just to make sure that we're all both on the same page, we talked about the importance of that timely and specific feedback, and we looked at some of the data that I collected for you from our observation earlier about engagement. You talked about the kids and their efficiency of time and how they need to make sure that they're using their time as effectively as they can. You emphasized the importance of writing in this class that maybe doesn't happen in other classes outside of English, how important it is to you. You talked about your strength in scaffolding things to get the kids ready for a bigger project like this, and the essential questions being kind of the backbone of that. You talked about how having the kids be more responsible for the product and for in this case, the paper that they're gonna write, and having them really own that.
Yep, ownership.
We looked at engagement, and we talked about how engagement varies and what it looks like, and sometimes it doesn't always translate to an observable data, especially if the kids are thinking. But that your cooperative learning structures that you have in your class really build that in, whether you can observe it or not. That it was a real sort of structured way of getting them doing that in a way that supported you not being able to get to every kid one-on-one as much as you'd like. You can at least model the behavior in front of them and then model it with a member of their group to get them headed in the right direction.
And that was why I had one member from each group right on the board and not volunteers,
Yeah.
or not, you know, I may have really 2 top students here and 2 top students here, and I'd have those 4 come up, you know? It's one from each group, knowing that at least one model.
And raising that level of concern for everybody in the
Went
group.
back, went back to each group, so.
So, and then we talked about valuing the time in the class and how if you have to, when you look at the final product and then correlate that with the engagement, that there are ways to go more structured. And then over the course of, say, the next 2 weeks, we ought to have enough data between those 2 things to line up what the next step needs to be for specific students.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think too, that even though the Utopia project is not an essay, but it is instead of a 5-paragraph theme, it's a 5-part presentation. And instead of writing prose, they're gonna do a PowerPoint with speaking, with oral descriptions of their big ideas, you know? And I think and what you have to do, I think at the end of this kind of a assignment, where the kids get the feedback that I didn't do so good, right? And you can and that's where then as a teacher you can be explicit, because you can be explicit up front and say, you know, one of the things I'm gonna grade you on is whether you use your time wisely or not, and that's just like, but when I get it back and I got a D, and I was told, and now I'm told that I didn't use my time wisely, now I get what not using my time wisely looks like.
Mhm.
You can say it up front, you can say it all along, but until they get that sitting in front of them that shows, here's what not using their time wisely looks like at the end, now it becomes a little more powerful conversation to say, when I give you the time, you need to use it, you know? But, and you do have to give them the time, because if you don't, we know what the homework rate is. I mean, I'd love to see a study in this school on homework rate.
That'd be an interesting thing that we could talk about maybe. in the
Because we
future,
could have a
too.
conversation about attendance, engagement, and homework, and the correlation between those three things, right? And we could say that probably the least important thing of all is whether they're 100% engaged in every class, and that it's more important whether they're doing their homework or whether they're here. I think first and foremost, they have to be here. They're gonna get something.
Just from
Just
being in the
almost from
seat.
osmosis, right, of being here, you know? And then secondly, and I think we know this from both of us who have college degrees, that we learned more outside of class in college than we did inside of class. It's how much do I want to really study?
Mhm.
Because when I study, I learn, you know? As a matter of fact, my son, who's an aerospace engineer at KU, said, I didn't really know how to learn until I got to college. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a powerful statement, right? And then you think, okay, well, do I have students engaged, right? Okay, I may have 100% engagement 100% of the time doing activities that are fluff and garbage, right?
That don't relate
That
directly
don't
back to
have
learning.
anything to do with whether I'm really learning and benefiting from the time that I spent here today, right? But 40% of my engagement in an 84-minute block gave me so much more
Mhm.
that I can actually use and go on in life and actually have benefit from. And I know it's kind of deep, right? You know, that's like, Mr. Murphy's think spent too much time, you know, thinking about how he wants his classes to roll. I don't want there to be, and there is some fluff. There's gotta be some fluff.
Mhm.
When you have kids as many days as we do over the course of a year, you're gonna do some fun activities that are just kinda, hey, let's just have a little fun with this topic today,
Yeah.
right? But hopefully they still got something out of it, you know, I don't do
Mhm.
anything for nothing. I hope you've realized that.
Sure.
That everything we do had at least some value or benefit to it. But I know that there are classrooms where there's really not as much benefit, especially when sometimes I think you're using the technology inappropriately.
Sure.
For just the sake of engagement.
I'm with you.
Right?
Okay, all right. I will check back with you regarding this stuff after we get the projects back in. We'll see
Yeah.
where we go from there, and we'll backwards load everything and kind of look at how we go.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.